Welcome to the Bible Department podcast from Whitefield Academy, a Christ-centered college preparatory school serving pre-K through 12th grade in Atlanta, Georgia. Join us for an inside look at the vibrant, engaging, and transformative biblical teaching shaping our students every single day, straight from the dynamic teachers who bring it to life. What do power tools have to do with the parables of Jesus? In this episode, grade 11 Bible teacher Bo Bowen explores how Jesus used rabbinic methods like Mishnah and Midrash and how students brought those teachings to life in bold and unexpected ways. So sit back, take a listen, and enjoy. Bible class is now in session.
Mr. Bowen, on presentation day, can I bring power tools to class? Why do you feel you need power tools, Jack? I don't want to say. Are you planning on building something in the middle of your presentation? Not building something, no. Then what do you need power tools for? I don't want to say. Such exchanges are the burden of teachers whose approach to curriculum includes imaginative projects and creative presentations. Occasionally, I will find myself excited that my students are engaging well with an assignment, but simultaneously worried they're headed for disaster. Power tools? For a presentation about the teaching methods of Jesus? Why? Yes, we had touched on the fact that Jesus was a carpenter, but he certainly wasn't toting a DeWalt 20-volt cordless around first century Galilee. So what on earth did Jack and his partner have in mind? What kind of Frankensteinian exhibition were they plotting? And why did it have to be a secret? My name is Bo Bowen. I've just completed my 4th year as a member of the faculty at Whitefield Academy, and my 1st year as a teacher in the Bible department. I teach Christian Thought, otherwise known as 11th grade Bible, a required course for all upper school juniors. The course has challenged me to bring together my extensive training and experiences as a pastor. I've been ordained since 2008. With my work as an educator in a way that makes the Bible come alive from both an academic perspective as well as a personal one. But it wasn't only the Power Tools group. During the next workday, I had this exchange with another student. Mr. Bowen, on presentation day, is it okay if we go first? I was just gonna choose groups at random, Jimmy, but we really want to go first. Why? I don't want to say. Then it must not be important enough to say, Jimmy. No, it's important. If we don't go first, the quality of our presentation will suffer. Why would that be? Why is going first so essential? I don't want to say. I suppose I could have pressed him further. I could have given them my best teachery look and insisted on the full explanation. In short, I could have initiated a come to Jesus conversation. Then again, that was sort of the purpose of this whole project. For each group to approach the person of Jesus, having received new insights into his unique existence, and then offer their own further insights into his specific teachings. To squelch the mystery they were laboring to preserve would have been antithetical to the objectives of the entire unit. So what was this unit about? And what exactly was the point of this project? Well, our 3rd official unit of Bible 11 focuses on Jesus, who he was, the claims he made, and the influence of his death, resurrection, and ascension as essential doctrines of the Christian church. With regard to the first overarching question, who was Jesus? As I approach the unit, the aspect of Jesus' identity I'm most compelled to convey to my students is the uniqueness of Jesus the person, specifically the uniqueness of Jesus the rabbi. Now, it's become fashionable in our day and age to speak of Jesus as a great moral teacher, or an influential historical figure, or even a martyr for progressive justice in the vein of Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. Therefore, it's not necessary to present students with reasons why they should believe the historical Jesus existed, or even that he was an inspiring teacher. What matters is for them to understand the kind of teacher Jesus was. What was it that made his words not only stand the test of time even outside religious circles, but also made him such a cogent figure in his own day within first century Galilee and Judea? What this boils down to, in my class, are several lessons that home in on aspects of Jesus the man and how God used these circumstances to shape his messianic identity. So we begin with his childhood, specifically the implications of his birth, which was a scenario suspicious enough to influence Joseph and Mary's own actions in the birth narratives of the Gospels. It's very likely Jesus was considered a mamzer, a person of suspect parentage, which is a concept rooted in the Mosaic Law. And this may well have resulted in arm's length distance from certain aspects of village life in Nazareth, including schooling opportunities and marriage prospects. But at the same time, to be acquainted with loneliness or rejection as mamzers would have been, well, that would have deeply affected Jesus' view of outcasts, the poor, the sick, the blind, the lame. Next, we discuss his role as tekton, a builder, or as our English translations often insufficiently put it, a carpenter. I asked the students to consider how a decade and a half of itinerant work as a handyman, which is really the best equivalent for tekton, traveling from village to village, repairing lintels, patching roofs, some light masonry, shaped the methodical patience and attention to detail that Jesus would later exhibit as a sought-after teacher and wonder worker. How being compensated with a bed for the night and a humble home-cooked meal molded him into a man who championed hospitality and captivated people around dinner tables. Then, of course, we come to the crux of the examination and to what the student's project is all about: Jesus the Rabbi. Jesus is called Rabbi and Teacher throughout the Gospels, but this title is more than just an identifier of his occupation. It assumes a level of reverence and deep respect, since rabbis in the first century were considered the learned authorities on God and his law. Now, most rabbis hailed from the sect of the Pharisees, also referred to in the Gospels as scribes and teachers of the law. Given the antagonism that many of them showed Jesus, today we often cast a negative view of these revered men, save for maybe Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea. But it's important to note that most commoners considered the Pharisees heroes of the faith. These were men who did not just know the entire Torah, which among predominantly illiterate people would have been impressive enough, but they knew how to interpret it and apply it to common life. The priestly class may have controlled the sacrifices offered in the temple in Jerusalem, but the Pharisees, the rabbis who lived among the people of Galilee and Judea, held the insights into one's daily domestic life, the commandments, the good and right way to live according to the will of God. Because of the ways in which many Pharisees clashed with Jesus in the Gospels, it's safe to say Jesus wasn't a Pharisee, yet he was still called Rabbi. In fact, crowds flocked to him because, as the Gospels testify in multiple places, he taught as one who had authority. Here was a man with no direct affiliation, no formal schooling, and no noticeable wealth, yet he carried himself like a rabbi. He taught like a rabbi. He was surrounded by disciples like a rabbi, and what he said seemed to epitomize the most impressive qualities of a rabbi. Interesting. But let's take it one level deeper. Rabbis in the first century employed several techniques for interpreting and explaining Torah. One technique was known as Mishnah, from a word meaning study. This method identified set laws or commandments and offered commentary on how to properly live them in a modern context. The word Mishnah would later identify an entire portion of the Jewish Talmud. Another technique was Midrash, which was a story-based interpretive method in which the rabbi would attempt to clarify the oral tales of the patriarchs. Why did Abraham have to leave his father's house? Why did David choose 5 stones instead of just 1? Or how did the animals know where to find the ark? Rabbis offered additional stories intended to fill gaps in the people's grasp of these ancient tales while preserving the Torah's intended themes and lessons. One of my favorite examples of ancient rabbinic midrash, and the one I tell the students so they can understand where I'm coming from with this, is the story of Abraham and his father Terah, based in Genesis 11. Why did Abraham have to leave his father's house, the people might have asked their rabbi? Well, as the midrashic story goes, it was that back in Ur, the ancient Sumerian city in which Abraham is first introduced, Terah made idols. Little idols, big idols, the entire pantheon of Sumerian and Akkadian gods he fashioned in a workshop and sold to all the people. Abraham, or Abram as he is first called, disapproved. So one night, he snuck into Terah's workshop, took an axe, and smashed all the idols to rubble. All but one, a large one into whose hand he placed the axe. In the morning, so the story goes, Terah stood dumbstruck in his workshop. "What's happened here?" he cried. Abram said, "It appears during the night this god grew angry and he destroyed the others." "This can't be," said Terah. "They're wood and stone. I made them with my own hands." To which Abram cleverly replied, "Why then do you bow down to them?" That is midrash, a story that clarifies the bigger story. Now, anyone who has read the Gospels encounters these two rabbinic techniques, Mishnah and Midrash, again and again. The Sermon on the Mount is Mishnah, even down to the structure. When a rabbi would offer his Mishnaic interpretation of a particular commandment, he usually began, "You have heard it said that you must fill in the blank. But I tell you," and then he would supply his specific interpretation. And that is the same rhetorical method Jesus employs throughout Matthew 5 through 7. And what are the parables of Jesus but midrashic stories intended to communicate a specific eternal theme about who God is and the commandments he's given us to love him with all our heart and soul and mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. This, by the way, is the deeper significance of the people marveling at Jesus' authority. The term refers to another rabbinic concept that was known as simcha, which in a nutshell refers to a rabbi's qualifications, his pronounced expertise. Often, simcha was bestowed by the rabbi who taught him, who recognized that the disciple had become a master. The rabbi would convey simcha upon his student, and this affirmed blessing indicated the new rabbi possessed the skill, training, and wisdom to carry on his rabbi's yoke, that is, his rabbi's way of interpreting and living the commands of Torah, his Mishnah and Midrash. This is why, throughout the Gospels, people are amazed that Jesus, an upstart teacher with no formal training under an established rabbi, nonetheless speaks as one with authority. It's also why, again and again, the Pharisees and the priestly class demand Jesus tell them by whose authority he's speaking, or what sign he can show to explain the purpose of, say, his clearing of the temple. We know, of course, that Jesus did not follow another rabbi. He did not receive simcha from man, but from his heavenly Father, whose voice had resounded off the waters of the Jordan River, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." This is just one of hundreds of powerful learning moments that take place each school day here at Whitefield. Thank you for supporting that work. And speaking of powerful, you're probably still wondering how power tools factored into this lesson. The students' project was twofold. First, they had to search the Gospels for examples of Jesus demonstrating his simcha through Mishnah and Midrash interpretations of Torah. Second, they had to further analyze those passages and then teach them to the class in an interactive and compelling way, just as Jesus had. And just as Jesus' ministry was uniquely compelling based on his early life experiences, I encourage the students to use their own interests, their own talents, and their own passions to make their lessons unique as well. So again, I probably shouldn't have been surprised when Jack asked to bring power tools to school, or Jimmy insisted he and his partner had to present first. I invited several staff members to join our small class on presentation day, and after running down the hall to grab a few additional instruction sheets off the copier, I returned to find half of the desks had been pushed together to arrange a large table, which Jimmy and his partner, Evan, had set with a Mediterranean feast of flatbread, oil, nuts, and other treats. And in the middle of the table was a large pineapple. And on the view board, the opening slide of their lesson displayed the words, "unreasonable hospitality and humility." It would have been too hard to set all this up in the middle of the presentations, Jimmy admitted. We figured after our lesson, everyone could enjoy the food while they listened to the other presentations. Is that okay, Mr. Bowen? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a saw. Specifically, I saw a handheld reciprocating saw plugged into an outlet. Next to it, pushed out of the way, was a wooden cage. I glanced at Jack, raised my eyebrows, and I saw him grin. I wondered whether it had been wise to invite other staff members, or I guess at this point I should have called them witnesses, to these presentations. But just like with the General Motors chassis and the pancake batter trinity, I found I had nothing to worry about and a lot to be proud of. Jimmy and Evan attentively served us food as they guided us through passages about the Good Samaritan and choosing the humble seat at a banquet rather than the place of honor. We relaxed, we broke bread, we listened. Finally, at the end of class, it was time for Jack and Ellie and the mystery of this large wooden cage. They began by referencing Matthew 18, in which Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive a neighbor who wrongs him. Peter then suggests doubling a common Mishnah of 3 times, to which Jesus replies, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." The passage continues as Jesus shifts from his Mishnah to Midrash, telling a parable of a king who forgives a servant's astronomical debt, only for that servant to immediately threaten the life of a friend who owed him a reasonable sum. The king finds out and casts this ungrateful servant into prison, where it's presumed he'll die long before he can work off the debt he owes. Jack picked up the reciprocating saw, while Ellie climbed into the wooden cage. He explained that we've all failed to forgive others with the same willingness as the king. One way or another, he said, we're all ungrateful servants, and we all deserve eternal imprisonment. The only difference between us and that ungrateful servant is that we have a Redeemer who holds the power to free us from our prison. Not only that, Jack said, he destroys the prison's power for good. Then came the piercing whir of the saw, and quickly donning protective eyewear, Jack leveled the blade into the wood and swiftly sawed the cage in 2. The walls clattered to the floor, and Ellie was freed. As a teacher, it's easy to believe you know more than your students. Cynicism creeps. You find yourself complaining why sometimes they just don't get it. It's a gloriously unnerving thing when God flips the script on you. When, despite your doubts, your disciples demonstrate their worthiness of simcha. Mr. Bowen, how did we do on our project? You did really well. Yeah, but how well? Jack asked. Red-faced, I showed him a sheepish smile. I don't want to say.